A new investigation from Politico's Alex Thompson lifts the lid on the unusual access and influence granted to billionaire and former Google CEO Eric Schmidt in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, even as the office's general counsel raised red flags. Schmidt's close relationship with President Biden's former senior science advisor, Eric Lander, apparently paved the way for his reaching secret influence in the office.
According to Politico, Schmidt's charity foundation, Schmidt Futures, actually indirectly paid the salaries of 2 science office staffers for 6 weeks, including that of the office's top senior official, who rose to leadership after Schmidt's ally, Lander, resigned in disgrace earlier this year amidst allegations he abused his employees. In his post-Google ventures, Schmidt has advocated strongly for a greater federal role in funding 5G technology and artificial intelligence. All right, Alex Thompson is White House reporter at Politico. He joins us now to discuss his latest. Welcome to Rising, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
Right, and so this follows your earlier reporting on Lander. And can you talk a little bit more about the way that Schmidt's nonprofit funded these fellowships? This is something that has gone on for a while, and Intercept's also done some interesting reporting on this. And I think people outside of Washington will be like, wait, hold on, tell me that again, that these billionaires are funding government positions and that's legal. So can you walk through that and how it helped Schmidt gain influence in the White House?
Absolutely. So it's meant to be confusing. And that's how they sort of are able to get away with this, because it is complicated. Now, essentially, the federal government set up a way to bring on extra staff in case they were short-staffed, and using private funding. Now, most of this comes through foundations, from universities, but what has happened in recent years is you've seen people like Eric Schmidt then fund the universities and the fellowships, and then those fellowships end up placing people in agencies where there are conflicts of interest with the billionaires. But because it's through sort of a conduit, in this case, it was the Federation of American Scientists that's headed by a close ally of Eric Schmidt. Because of that, there's like one step removed. Now, even so, I have internal emails that made it very clear, even if it was through the Federation of American Scientists, they said in emails that they had secured funding through Schmidt Futures. And that email is what first prompted the internal ethical red flags by the general counsel, along with several other people in the office's legal office.
Yeah, and is there something that would be done about this because of those flags being raised?
Well, in this case, what happened is you basically had a clash where, because of those red flags, they eventually brought on one of the people through a more normal process. Now, in terms of actually reforming the whole system, what you'd have to do is really reform the law, because it's through this thing from 1971 called the Interpersonnel Act, which is way too complicated. But essentially, we're in a place where, this is just one office. This is happening across the entire executive branch. And at the moment, there's not a lot of transparency into who is funding a lot of these fellowships.
And how much of this is just a kind of shortage of funding for positions in the government, and how much of it is red tape? Because we're now almost in April, so more than a year into the administration. And if you look at the Senate calendar, they're still grappling with all of these different executive appointments, more than a year into the administration, and these low-level deputy assistant secretary, like positions that nobody cares about, other than the people in that office, are being pushed through the Senate confirmation process, and as a result, it basically takes forever to staff up an administration. And it's not partisan; it's Democrat, Republican, either way. And I imagine maybe this gets people in the door faster, or is it more about just funding, that an office just doesn't have enough funding to hire the staff that they feel like they need?
That's such a good question. The real answer is it's both. Now, the sheer number of Senate confirmable positions in the executive branch has basically let a lot of the executive branch to just be at a standstill. As a result, there have been these mechanisms that have been created, sort of like taping things together in order to bring on extra staff, like you're saying. Also, in some cases, the science office only has a $5 million annual budget. If you want to have extra staff, then this is also a mechanism. So it's the combination of these two dynamics you're talking about, the dysfunction in Congress, a lack of funding. This was sort of seen and created, honestly, in an earnest way to help the federal government work better. But what's happened is that people like Eric Schmidt have then used this avenue in order to help bring on maybe some people that are allied with their vision for science policy, for example.
Yeah, I have to imagine it's partly an issue of the more people that have to be confirmed by the Senate, like that number keeps increasing, but like the literal number of senators there are does not. It's like more work to do, like infinitely more work to do for the same amount of people.
Yes, and the Senate also has become slower too, as partisanship has increased. I mean, you had Ted Cruz putting a hold on so many State Department officials for a long time over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and any senator can do that, put a hold on a nominee. So you're absolutely right. You've essentially had the work, like Senate's moving slower, and yet they have more work to do. And so now you have an administration that still is not fully staffed up over a year into it.
Right, and to your point, it used to be that both parties believed that the party in power, more or less had the right by winning the election to staff their government. And so if some deputy undersecretary was sent up to the Senate, it was just by unanimous consent, okay, fine. As long as this person's not like a criminal, then they go through. But right now they're using them as leverage points for all their different parochial interests. But I wonder if is there any way to salvage this project, because it does feel, just from a basic kind of patriotic place, that if, say, experts at universities are willing to, basically volunteer for the federal government, that does seem like something that would be useful to the public. But is there a way to write the law so that it doesn't instantly get used? Because you could see it on the other side too. Let's say George Mason is getting a whole bunch of like Koch industry funding, and they're like, hey, we're happy to provide you with all sorts of experts.
What's wrong with that?
Yeah, Robbie would love every second of that. It's like a libertarian dream.
Yeah.
So is there a way to do this that doesn't make Robbie happy?
I'm sure that I know for a fact that some members of Congress are already thinking about potential ways to do it. I mean, the most obvious way is that you just need to make the funding transparent, because when people, if everyone knows that this is a Schmidt Futures-backed fellowship, then people are going to be able to raise red flags. In this case, it was almost sort of an accident that the general counsel found out that it was a Schmidt Futures-backed person, because the person was in their first week on the job and, didn't seem to know that you don't put that in writing. And as a result, that's what like sort of prompted this whole story.
Yeah. Well, don't worry, Ryan, I'm never actually happy.
That's excellent.
Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And Kim Iverson will join us. Stick around next.